Hello, welcome to part one of our notes on the section entitled The End of the War in Unit 8. We're going to talk specifically today about two battles, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and why they were such important battles in the Civil War. So if you remember a little bit to last time, we talked about the big move that General Lee is taking for the Confederacy. He's moving his troops up into northern territory. So if we're up here on the map, you can see kind of where we're talking about Pennsylvania, Maryland region. We talked a little bit about the Battle of Antietam last time. So Lee is doing this for a couple reasons. One, he's trying to impress either England or France or some foreign country to become allies of the Confederacy. And then he's also giving his farmers in Virginia an opportunity to harvest their crops by moving the battles up into northern territory. This is a very bold strategy. It's happening in July of 1863, and we're going to see how it pays off here in a second. Okay, so you've probably heard quite a bit about the Battle of Gettysburg, or at least you've heard the Battle of Gettysburg. It is the largest battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. So to give you an idea of just the sheer size of what we're talking about, the Union had 75,000 troops at this battle, and the Confederates had 50,000 troops. So that's kind of mind-boggling to wrap your head around, thinking about a battle with that many people in one area. So one thing that I typically talk about for students here in Liberty is if you think about Arrowhead Stadium. Okay, so a full Arrowhead Stadium is about 76,000 people. That's roughly the size of the Union Army at Gettysburg. Okay, if at the exact same time you had a completely full Kauffman Stadium where the Royals play, their capacity is about 37,000. So to be able to kind of in your mind to think about the Battle of Gettysburg, you'd have to have a completely full Arrowhead Stadium. That would be the Union Army. The Confederate Army, you'd still have to add about 13,000 people to the full Kauffman Stadium to replicate how many men were on the Confederate side. That's a lot of people in one particular area. Okay, so just kind of give you a visual to kind of wrap your head around a little bit. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg is going to take place technically over 3 days, and it's a huge battle. Part of it's fought a little bit on the edge of the town of Gettysburg. Some of it's fought in the countryside. Some of it's fought on some farmland. But basically, the first part of July in 1863, these two humongous armies are going to meet at a small college town named Gettysburg. There's nothing like super particularly strategy connected to the city of Gettysburg. It just happens to be where the two armies converge for this battle. Now, we could spend literally an entire course talking about the Battle of Gettysburg, and there are college courses about that. The one big turning point that most people know about is an aspect of the battle called Picketts Charge. Okay, so Picketts Charge is going to happen towards the end of the 3-day battle. And what happens in this particular part of the battle is you have a hill that slopes from down here where you see the red, and it goes up towards a little kind of like a hillside where you see these blue bars. This is where the Union Army is. Okay, so the Union Army is on top of this kind of gradual hill. They've got cannons set up. Down on this side, you have the Confederate Army, part of the Confederate Army, and part of it is led by George Pickett. So this area right here is where George Pickett and his men are. Okay, the Confederacy at this point in the battle is pretty desperate. They have to attack the Union position up here, even though they know they're going to have to be charging up kind of like a general sloping hill. Think about like attacking a hill from the bottom, going up towards the hill, and on top of the hill, there's cannons firing down at you, okay? It's going to be really difficult. The odds of them actually successfully pulling this off are almost basically 0%, but they feel like they have to take this chance. This is a little under a mile that they go. Technically, it's about like a half to 3/4 of a mile, and there's basically a wheat field in this area. So if you notice, there's kind of like a little road here, and then the rest of this on both sides are wheat fields. As Pickett leads his men up across this wheat field towards the Union position, his men are killed at a huge rate. Like 60% of his men are killed as they're crossing this wheat field. And this is kind of towards the end of the 3-day battle. It's a pretty decisive part of the battle where the Union wins, and there's really no way that the Confederacy is going to recover from that. So here's a picture. If you're looking like from where like the Union was looking down, this would be what was happening as Pickett's men were charging up the hill. Now, I was able to spend some time in Gettysburg about probably, I think it was 2007. I spent roughly about a week there doing a seminar workshop where we listened to lecturers, and then we also did some work out on the battlefield and did some tours and stuff. And on one of the last days there were 4 of us that got up super early before the sun came up, and we got to where Picketts Charge was, and we wanted to kind of see it without a whole bunch of tourists. So when you're looking at this picture, down here would be where the Confederacy started, and they had to march up this hill. And then right now there's some monuments up here, but this is where the cannons would have been from the Union facing down onto the men. And this is the road. It's actually a modern day road now, of course, but there was a fence there. There was wheat on both sides, and it was pretty powerful walking up that particular part of the wheat field. In fact, the 4 of us were teachers attending the seminar, and we just kind of slowly walked up the wheat field, and we didn't even say anything to each other. We were just kind of like feeling the importance of that particular area. We actually took this picture. I took this picture after we had marched up a little ways. I turned around, and you could see the sunrise coming behind us, and these are the 4 shadows of us standing there on Pickett's Charge. But I mean, it was a powerful moment, because you think about all of the men that died on that particular small piece of land during the Battle of Gettysburg, and it was a powerful moment. So if you go to Gettysburg today, and we're actually going to take a virtual tour here tomorrow, but there were people from all over the United States, both Confederate and Union, fighting at this battle. So you had regiments from all the different states. After the war is fought, those different states come back and they put up monuments to their regiment. This is the one from Pennsylvania. Because it's fought in the state of Pennsylvania, they had the most men in the battle, I believe. And so you can see this was kind of a more elaborate one. But as you drive around the battlefield, you'll see, and you can kind of see in the picture here, different ones. It looks almost kind of like a cemetery. There are not men necessarily buried on the battlefield. There's actually a cemetery next to it. But each of these states put up different statues and monuments to their particular soldiers. And so when you drive through the battlefield, because it's over the course of many acres, there's all these monuments that you can stop and you can read a little bit. And if you take a tour while you're there, it's really powerful. To be able to officially give a tour, like be a tour guide at Gettysburg, you have to pass a really strict test that they give to be an officially licensed tour guide. And the rate of people that pass that test is super low. It's like 5 or 10%. You have to know everything about what happened during those 3 days, where particular regiments were, when things happened on the battlefield, names of all the people. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult test, but you have to be able to be certified to actually give a tour to people at the Battle of Gettysburg. Here's another monument on top of one of the areas of the battlefield, kind of looking down into an area. And you'll see these different areas on the virtual tour tomorrow. Okay, so the Battle of Gettysburg is fought over 3 days. The North, or the Union, ends up winning the Battle of Gettysburg. The losses by both sides are humongous. 23,000 soldiers are dead or wounded on the Union side. The Confederacy has 28,000 dead and wounded. The people of Gettysburg have to bury the dead, both animals like horses and mules and stuff that get killed in the battle, as well as the soldiers. There's some incredible stories where people talk about you could literally smell the rotting flesh, mostly from the horses and animals that were on the battlefield for days and days after the battle. And some people said you could even smell it from several miles away. But there's a huge cemetery that they construct right there in Gettysburg. You've probably heard of the Gettysburg Address. That's where Lincoln's going to come several months later in the month of, I believe it's November. And he comes in November and gives a speech as they kind of like open up that cemetery and commemorate the dead that were in the Battle of Gettysburg. That happens several months later. So again, the numbers here, killed and wounded, about 3,000, little over 3,000 Union, almost 4,000 Confederate, a lot of wounded. You do have some missing and captured, and that's where we get the totals there as far as the people that are dead and wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg. We talked about Shiloh and Antietam earlier, and about how those were like really eye-opening battles where people saw just huge casualty rates. This is a comparison when you can see what's happening at Gettysburg. Gettysburg's almost twice the size of either Shiloh or Antietam. So again, just the numbers, and it's the biggest battle ever fought on this half of the planet. It is a monumental thing. So the reasons why Gettysburg is important: number one, the sheer number of people that are in the battle and the losses that both sides have as a result of what's happening. General Lee loses about 1/3 of his army at the Battle of Gettysburg. So 1 out of every 3 soldiers that go into the Battle of Gettysburg, he loses. So that's going to be significant. 2, it's going to stop the Confederates' march into Northern Territory. This is as far north as they get. They then retreat back into Virginia, and for the rest of the war, it's fought primarily in the South. So Lee was hoping to impress foreign countries by getting a big battle. He wanted to give his men a chance to harvest their crops and stuff. All of that then is turned around with the loss at Gettysburg by the Confederacy. Now, while that is happening up in Pennsylvania, down in the southern part of the United States in Mississippi, there's also a major battle that is finishing at a place called Vicksburg. Vicksburg is a city along the Mississippi River, and it is the last remaining kind of holdout for the Confederacy along the Mississippi. It's really important that the Union gains control of this city so that they can gain control of the entire Mississippi River. The people of Vicksburg do not want to give up the city of Vicksburg. They dig in and basically build walls around their city so the Union cannot get in. So the Union has to surround the city of Vicksburg, and for days and days and days basically wait them out until the people inside Vicksburg don't have enough food or supplies, and they're eventually forced to give up. The day after Gettysburg happens, Vicksburg falls to the Union. So you've got 2 humongous victories for the Union happening in different parts of the country at essentially exactly the same time. And we've talked about how neither side was really able to get a lot of momentum. This gives a ton of momentum to the Union, which they are then going to be able to turn into a victory. It's not going to be just immediate. It's going to be about a year after this, but eventually the Union's going to be able to take this momentum and eventually use it to win the war. So here's just a couple of maps of Vicksburg. Vicksburg, right along the Mississippi River. Mississippi River has this really hairpin style turn kind of right around Vicksburg. And you can see the blue here. What the Union does is they surround the city. This is another map that kind of shows what's happening at Vicksburg. But 2 kind of unrelated things, or not unrelated, but happening in different parts of the country at essentially the same time. So the importance of Vicksburg is it gives the Union basically total control of the Mississippi River. The Union now has a ton of momentum. The other important thing that happens because of Vicksburg is Lincoln has been looking for a good leader. We talked about that in the last section of notes. He is now going to place General Grant in charge of the entire Union Army. Grant has been in charge of what's happening in the West. He's been in the Battle of Shiloh. He's now in the Battle of Vicksburg. Lincoln is impressed with Grant's ability to stay with a plan and carry it out. And so at this point, Lincoln places General Grant in charge of the entire Union Army. He has finally found the general that he thinks is going to lead them to victory. All right, so we're going to end with kind of the middle part there of these notes. We're going to talk about the follow-up and kind of how we eventually do end up finishing out the war in part 2 of the end of the war. All right, thanks, guys.